Is it Thursday or Friday? I think it might be Thursday. Good morning. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. It's the Anthony Davis Show. It says so right there. It's 9 o'clock here on the West Coast. I'm now in California. Yesterday, Cleveland, Ohio. Yesterday, I was also in Minnesota. Was I in Minnesota? No, Minneapolis. Is Minnesota in Minneapolis? No. I don't know where I was. Time zones are screwed up. I'm all over the place. Anyway, I'm here with you now. It's nice to be back in the yellow box, which might be changing to a black box. There's a rumor going around. This might be changing to a black box. Yeah, just a rumor. We're this is Backchannel. It's just after 9 here Pacific. It's just afternoon Eastern, and thank you for joining the show. It's the only show where you can talk back to the hosts without actually talking. Well, you can talk, but you don't have to type. So you can just say the wake-up word to your device, then say, and then your message, and then we can chat. I have a cup of Earl Grey tea, which I'm going to need today because I'm quite jet-lagged, a little bit tired, but I'm going to do my best because that's the only way I know how. Carla's in London. She's producing, creating order out of chaos. And I'm creating chaos out of order. That's kind of how it works. We're going to look through the morning papers. We're going to discuss what's happening across the world. We're going to analyze a little deeper some of those stories. And we're also just generally going to kind of chew the fat of what's been happening across America for the last 24 hours. Because it's a big deal, it's a thing. It's a whole thing. So we're going to dive straight into the newspapers. I think we'll go to the Wall Street Journal first. They lead with a fissure is seen next to a house covered with volcanic ash on La Palma, part of Spain's Canary Islands, on Wednesday. Thousands of residents have been displaced since the eruption began 10 weeks ago, and lava continues to flow. Wow, that might be one of the most amazing photographs I've ever seen in my life. The headline, Ash engulfs Ireland as eruption shows no sign of relenting. So there we go, the Wall Street Journal for this Thursday morning. Also, justices question abortion rights precedent. We're going to discuss this in quite a lot more detail later in the show. But yes, the Supreme Court case over Mississippi law challenges protections dating to Roe v. Wade, which is, of course, 1973. So, here we are 48 years later, and still they're talking about winding back the clock. And it looks like it could happen as well. Yeah. The world is watching because, of course, America sneezes and the world catches a cold. So if they make a change to this, then you're going to see it happen in other countries as well, where there's an increasing kind of evangelical Christian movement who are not wanting to live in a modern world. They're choosing not to live in a modern world. First case of Omicron in US is detected in San Francisco. It says the first, I think they found a second one this morning, actually, so this is probably since it's been printed, but the first known case of the Omicron variant in the US was identified in a San Francisco resident who recently returned from South Africa, the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and California health officials said. The CDC said on Wednesday that the fully vaccinated traveler who returned to California on November 22nd has mild COVID-19 symptoms that are improving. He's been self-quarantining since testing positive on Monday. And all known contacts have so far tested negative for the variant. I mean, we just don't know yet, do we? We don't know what the effects of Omicron are because they haven't tested it with the vaccines. They need to test the vaccines in the lab on this variant to see if they are able to have efficacy against this variant. And so that's basically what's going to be happening as we speak. So the sooner they come out with that data, they said it would be a couple of weeks. So that's probably in another 10 days or so, I guess. Bicycle makers offer clues on the persistence of inflation. It says, for a glimpse at why inflationary pressures are unlikely to ease anytime soon, consider the bicycle. Bike prices in the US and Europe rose sharply at the start of the pandemic because of booming consumer spending and snarl-ups in global supply chains that meant long delays and higher costs for manufacturers. It says, well, now they're working on building bikes for 2022 in a continuing environment of economic uncertainty, with more questions added recently by the emergence of the Omicron variant of the coronavirus. And today's rampant demand and strangled supply are already pushing next year's prices higher. Well, a bicycle is a good example, isn't it? Because it's made up of so many different component parts. And those component parts have to come from all different places. You know, they don't make the one thing in the one place. You know, the aluminum for the frame probably comes from one place, and then the steel for the chain comes from somewhere else, and then the wire for the brakes comes from another place. It's a bit like how they build an aeroplane, a modern aeroplane. You know, different components. The landing gear comes from South Wales, and the wings come from elsewhere, and the tailplane comes from somewhere, and it's all brought together. There's a very interesting story about this. I don't know if you're interested, but I'll digress momentarily. Because Airbus, the European manufacturer that's based in Toulouse, France, when they built their new... What was the plane that they built when this happened? Oh, actually, no, I think it might have been Boeing, you know. I think it might have been Boeing building the Dreamliner, which was the first plane built with, like, Chinese parts. You know, they brought all of these parts together. And one of the manufacturers making the cable runs to run the electrical cables, the whole length, was working in metric, and the other was working in imperial. Right? So Boeing were working in imperial, and they had a European supplier working in metric. And so when the cables arrived, they didn't stretch far enough. It might have even been the A380, which was the Airbus. It might have even been the Airbus. I forget, but I remember that one of them was working in imperial, the other was working in metric. And you would have thought that an aircraft manufacturer would have just nailed down a universal flavor for measuring distance. Plane's a bit short, isn't it? And to me, it reminded me of like Doc Brown in Back to the Future, you know, where he's like hanging off the clock tower and he's trying to bring together those two plugs just to try and get Marty McFly back to 1985, and they just don't quite fit. Or a bit like in any changing room of any retailer. The person who invented and designed the cubicle in the changing room in your favorite clothing store never met the person who made the curtain. They never spoke. They never spoke. They never met. They never spoke. So, I don't know how we got onto that. We were talking about supply chain issues with bicycles, but it's a very good point. Sorry, Carla, what did you say was made in Northern Ireland? I can hear you. The DeLorean was made in Northern Ireland. The great American John DeLorean vehicle was made in Northern Ireland. That's fascinating. Yeah. Who knew that the DeLorean was made in Northern Ireland? So there's a few DeLoreans here in California, because obviously everybody's a huge Back to the Future fan. And recently I parked in a parking lot, a multi-story parking lot, and there was a guy getting out of his DeLorean right opposite me. So I went over to him and I went, "Would you mind?" And he was like, "Be my guest." And I sat in it, and he took my phone, he took photos of me standing with it. Unfortunately, it did not have a flux capacitor. Some of them have been converted to look exactly like the time machine. But his was in beautiful condition. And I said, "Do you love it?" And he was like, "I love it." Isn't it funny how it's a crap car, the DeLorean? I mean, everybody knows it's a bit of a crap car. It really is not a very good car at all. But isn't it amazing how that movie just turned it into an icon? I mean, it sits in the Peterson Auto Museum here in Los Angeles. There is a DeLorean with a flux capacitor. in there, and I'd seen it in the museum before, but I'd never actually like sat in one until this guy let me have a go on his. He's so proud of it, of course. I said, "How long have you had it?" He was like, about 5 years. It's just wonderful. It makes me feel very happy that something that's just so, it's just a seed of an idea from this guy, who wanted to make a futuristic car, and the idea of making it out of aluminium panels and not painting them is genius, isn't it? We're just talking about dream cars, Carla and I. We're just talking about what is our dream car. I mean, I actually feel like I drive my dream car because I really genuinely don't have like supercar dreams, My dreams are quite practical. I drive an electric car that I bought secondhand. It was like 3.5 years old when I bought it. And I paid a fifth of its retail price. And I don't crave any other vehicle. I love it. I mean, I actually have always bought really like crappy cars, but like by other people's standards, crappy cars. Like I've owned smart cars. I had 2 smart cars when I lived in London. And for me, that was like the greatest invention. Because a smart car originally was designed by Swatch. Make watches. They had a partnership with Mercedes, who did the engineering, and Swatch did the design. So the original smart car that came out about 25 years ago was a Swatch design. But the fact that it had a Mercedes motorcycle engine in it made it kind of reliable and brilliant. And it did like 70 miles to the gallon. So it was environmentally friendly, and it only had 2 seats. And I would actually buy another smart car. They make an electric one now. It only has like a 50-mile range, but I would definitely consider getting another little smart car. Although, they're so small. I worry if you were to get kind of hit by a truck, you wouldn't really. I mean, it does have a steel safety shell. It's based on this safety shell concept, like an egg that you can't crack. If you put pressure on an egg from the top, you can't break it. That's how the Smart is designed. So I had 2 of those. And then I had a Toyota, or they call them a Scion here, an IQ, which is basically the same size as a smart car, but the difference is that the rear seats fold down to become a trunk. But if you have the rear seats up, there is no trunk. The rear seat is against the back window, the rear window, right there. And that was also kind of clever, because it's like, what's the point in us driving around in a car that has got rear seats when we never use them? So we might as, and they were split. So you could take a third passenger on one side of the rear seat and put some shopping or some stuff in the half trunk. Very clever. But I didn't really like the Toyota IQ. It wasn't. There's something not quite right about it. I think it was the CVT gearbox. This is a bit too much detail. But the IQ was kind of a fun little car. And then the best car I ever had was a Nissan. What was it called? A Nissan Figaro. Best car I ever had. The Nissan Figaro. All Americans drive automatic. And I think that is the best decision they ever made. And let me explain why. So I learned to drive a manual car, when I learned to drive. And my first 2 cars were manual, going back to the 90s, right? But from then on, I bought an automatic, and I've stayed driving automatic ever since. And this is what occurred to me. Firstly, automatic is better, right? Because there's less stuff to do. Why would you want to do more stuff when you drive? You need to be able to send text messages. you need to be able to fiddle with the radio with the other hand. You can't go using my dad used to call it the pot stirrer, a gear stick. It just makes no sense. But the advantage of everybody driving automatic, as they do mainly in the States, certainly here in Los Angeles, is that when you're at a stoplight and the stoplight turns green, everybody moves forward at the same time. Because all you have to do is release your foot from the brake. Whereas in Europe, where they drive manual, people have to come off the brake, apply the clutch, move the stick into first gear, and then put their foot on the accelerator. So there's all these things to do, and that's why the traffic does not move as quickly in Europe when a light turns green. Whereas in Los Angeles, a light turns green, it's like every car is towing the car behind. They all move forward at the same time. It's very, very clever. Kristen, thank you for joining us from Illinois. Nice to know that you're part of Backchannel this morning. It's 16 after 9. We're discussing your favorite vehicle and whether you're a manual or an automatic driver. But, I mean, Carla, who's in England at the moment, has said to me, you know, why do they all drive automatic? And it's like, why wouldn't you? You know, why wouldn't you? I think there's a stigma in England about automatic because automatics were always a little bit more expensive, just a little bit more expensive. And somehow it kind of was like less macho. Hi, Stacey. Whether it's less, you're less macho because you're not driving manual. I don't know what the psychology is behind that, but there genuinely is a prejudice in the UK. Oh, you drive automatic, really? Like you're not able to drive manual. No one should drive manual. It's ridiculous that we still use, when everything is automated in our homes, you know, when we can talk to our smart speaker or when we can adjust our lights with our voice, why are we still needing 2 feet and 2 hands to drive a car? Doesn't make sense. And in an electric car, it's even better than an automatic because you have a thing called one-pedal driving. So you never touch the brake in a electric car. You literally use the accelerator. When you come off the accelerator pedal, that slows the car down. When you put your foot down on the accelerator, the car goes forward. That's basically what it's one-pedal driving. No gears, 1 foot. You don't even have to move the foot to the brake. You only use the brake in an emergency. It's very interesting to me. The psychology of modern driving. So I learned to drive on a manual car, 2 hands, 2 feet. Exhausting. I then drove automatic for years, and then when I moved to electric, I'm now using less hands and less feet, you know, or fewer. I should say fewer. Carla says, is it less satisfying? No, it's more satisfying because you can focus on driving. Instead of being distracted with like picking a gear, why would you want to pick a gear? Let the car pick the gear. Anyway, I highly recommend, if you haven't got an electric car, or even just test drive one, just see the difference. You'll never go back. I have 2 electric cars now, and I will never go back. I own 2 currently, but I've had 3. It's just, I bought them all, you know, one of them was $4,000, like £3,000. The world has changed, you know. That's why when I read about the Supreme Court considering banning abortion, I'm like, the world's already changed, Supreme Court. You know, we don't even drive manual cars anymore. Cars drive themselves. Women choose what they do with their own bodies. The world changed. I tell you what I saw yesterday, which I was very proud of. When I was walking down the air bridge to board a Delta flight from Minnesota back to Los Angeles, there was advertising posters all down the inside of the air bridge, advertising Delta's services. So they were saying, you know, upgrades to Comfort Plus. And there was a photograph of 2 men enjoying themselves together, cuddling up. And I was like, finally, we have inclusive advertising here in America. Finally, they've taken a gay couple and used them as an example of 2 people upgrading to premium economy and snuggling together for the flight. They were both white men. If one of them was a black man and the one was a white man, then I would have been I would have been like, but I think maybe for Delta that might have been a step too far. But the fact that they've embraced two men, they were very Caucasian. Apparently in Norway, they have a new Christmas commercial and Santa is gay. Santa would be like a, what do they call it? What's the name for like a big guy in the gay community? What's the name there? What's the name they give to? I wish I could. It'll come to me. But I just like the idea that Santa is like in that category. A bear. Santa is a bear. A big gay bear. It's genius. But it is interesting to me. Oh, it was a celebration of 50 years since homosexuality was decriminalized in Norway, so that's why they did it. But, to see this Delta ad on the wall, which was repeated several times down the air bridge, and to see two men cuddling up, I took a picture of it, and I thought it was great. But that just shows how far companies have come, because, corporate America has been really the last sector to embrace gender equality and sexual preference. And it was only recently we started to see black families in TV advertising. And America's been slower than everywhere else. It just has. Arguably, it needs to do it more. And yet, we've got Delta advertising two guys upgrading to premium economy and having a cuddle on the plane. And yet, we've got the Supreme Court winding the clock back 60 years on abortion rights. These two things happened for me on the same day. I was looking at these two examples on the same day. You can't advertise a gay couple as normal and criminalize abortion. These are different worlds. And I know which world I want to live in. And I actually think most people would like to live in a progressive, modern society where people are not judged for their sexuality or their gender identity or for their right to choose whether they want to continue having a baby if they got pregnant by accident or they got raped or whatever is the reason. Or even a baby is unwell and can't survive a pregnancy. The law would say that it still has to be seen through. It makes no sense to me. But I know where it's coming from. I know it's coming from this Christian right. And I feel like Christianity is not about this. Christianity is about inclusivity and offering support, food and water to the poor, to the needy. And I would include minorities in that group. Now, I know in the Bible it says a man should not lie with another man. But we're living in a modern world. We're living in a world where men have always lay with other men. They just did it in secret. And women lay with other women. They just did it in secret. And people terminated pregnancies. And they did it in secret. So what do we want? What do we need for our society? We need to stop doing stuff in secret. And you know what I think part of the problem is? To be controversial just for a moment. Stacey, nice to know you're with me, and you agree with me, and you're having pizza for lunch. I would suggest that actually a lot of the people that protest too much are themselves living these lifestyles in secret. And look at the Catholic Church, that's supposed to be the kind of the all-powerful religious entity. Turned out to be the most at the very nucleus of child abuse, which was homosexuality. It was in addition to child abuse, and I mean, is child abuse okay in the Bible, but homosexuality isn't? Does it not count if they're underage? It's like there's all these caveats. And so these institutions that supposedly tell us how to live, what to do, and how to think are themselves contradicting their own scripture, their own teachings, and their own preachings. And that, for me, cancels it out. It just cancels it out. So how do we... I mean, it was very worrying seeing what was going on in the Supreme Court yesterday. Because I have no doubt that, Brett Kavanaugh and Amy and Neil and all of these people that were protesting, they've also had life experience that between them, arguably. I mean, Brett Kavanaugh famously was very drunk and was put on the stand before he was put onto the Supreme Court about being inappropriate, and a woman testified against him, and obviously they ignored her because she's a female and he's a white male, and so he was able to ascend to the Supreme Court. But in reality, she was one of the most compelling witnesses I've ever seen. Because there's no justice when the white male hetero is king, or president, or chief justice. It's just the screwed up society that we live in. And every country has its version of this, not exclusive to America. Every country has a version of this. I was actually talking to somebody earlier talking about lobbying and how in the UK lobbying is kind of illegal. And yet, in America, people have lobbyist on their business card. It's like, it's a vocation. We have secret lobbying. We have underhand, secret handshake lobbying that goes on in England. And it's a shame because, we claim to be so pure in that area and how we don't mix, corporate interests with political decisions. And of course, it's not the case. And that was the thing I think that frustrated me the most living there, was this whole kind of secret handshake world of deals being done and policies being made to suit business, and infrastructure projects that go so over budget, and then it turns out that one of the ministers is got shares in the company that's doing the construction, or you kind of find out. Whereas in America, it's you can do whatever you want. There was this scandal with PPE in England, wasn't there? With the ministers recommending different companies to stockpile PPE, and it turned out that these were companies they'd set up themselves so they could benefit. I mean, it's wow, really? How did people become so corruptible, so money-oriented? If you already have a life and a vocation, is it worth risking all of that for a few more coins? Because I was talking to somebody about this earlier. I live modestly, but if I was suddenly very wealthy, I don't think I would change anything. I like it. This is who I am right now. This is where I want to be. I wouldn't buy a huge house. I'd stay in an apartment. It's very interesting how people feel like... I used to say, you should give everybody like $1 million. Just the government should give everybody $1 million just to see how it feels. And realize that actually it's not life-changing. And that you can still fundamentally be who you are. You can still have poor taste and be wealthy. Because we feel like there's this desire to be ostentatious. And actually, what if you're just not ostentatious? What if you're the kind of person that just isn't ostentatious? And suddenly you come into money. Do you suddenly become ostentatious? No, you don't. It's just not who you are. And you see this with lottery winners, people who were living on a caravan park who suddenly win 10 million and they buy everything. They literally buy everything. Gold, tigers, and marble walk entranceways, and then they basically piddle it all away, and then they become very unhappy. Or they commit suicide. Or, they turn to crime. Because we're not wired to be like this. I say this about celebrity. We're not wired to be famous, to be notable. That's not the human condition. And that's why it's hard for celebrities. And that's why so many of them become addicts or just give it up. I was thinking that about Rick Moranis. Right? Just like, okay, I'm done. Had a great career. Don't need the money. Don't want to be famous. And we had it in England. We had a very famous comedian in England called Ronnie Barker. He just wanted to run an antique shop. So he just gave it up. Well, Kate Bush, who I know a little bit, she actually she still made music, but she just didn't want to be out front, So she's made albums since, and she's come back to performing since. But she never really gave it up, She was just making music in private. But Ronnie Barker, who I think was one of the best comedians Britain ever had, was very, very famous. Was like we call them national treasures in the UK. He just decided one day he was going to go and work in an antique shop. He bought a little antique shop in the Cotswolds, which is a lovely little area. And he just sold antiques. Which was ironic, really, because some of the characters that he played in his career were like shopkeepers. And so to kind of become a shopkeeper was, I think, rather cute. But his comedy partner, Ronnie Corbett, carried on working as a comedian, continued to wanted to carry on having a career. But Barker was like, I'm done. And the other thing that Ronnie Barker did that was very, very interesting to me is that he was also a very accomplished writer. But because he didn't have an ego and he didn't want people to know that he was writing the sketches and performing them, he would write them under a pseudonym and send them in to the BBC. I think his name was Clarence somebody. I think it might have even been Didn't he change Didn't the letters make up Ronnie Barker? I don't know, but anyway, he operated under a pseudonym, and he would write some of the best comedy sketches in history were written by the guy who performed them, but he didn't want to take the credit for it. So these sketches would just be sent in to the TV station, and they'd be like, "Oh, we've had another sketch from so-and-so," and this anonymous writer became the main writer on the show, and no one ever knew it was him. Bob Ferris. Clarence, that I'm thinking of, was the name of a character that he played in... Was it either in Open All Hours, or it was... There was a show called Clarence that flopped. It was actually it was the only Ronnie Barker flop, I seem to remember. It was a spin-off of... was it a spin-off of that prison show he did, you know, when he was in prison? Porridge. I think it was a spin-off of Porridge. Anyway, Oh, no, actually, no, it wasn't. There was a spin-off of Porridge. That was called something else. Clarence was like a character, sleepy character, that he played in a Two Ronnies sketch that he ended up doing as a solo, and it didn't work. Anyway, that's not the reason why he quit. But I just love the idea that he was writing under an assumed name. That wasn't even it was actually a very boring, he picked a very boring name. You say it was Paul Ferris. Bob Ferris. Yeah. Isn't that wonderful to be the kind of person who is just like so egoless that you would be prepared to write under an assumed name and also because he was in a double act, and the other half of the double act didn't do much writing. You know, he was a performer, so he didn't want to like upstage the other guy. I'm sure that had a lot to do with it because they were great friends. You know, we can learn a lot from people in history he's dead now, he's been dead for about 20 years, and I met his son one time. His son was called Timothy. I met his son at a garden party. Random, isn't it? But it's a great life lesson to be able to be successful and yet not be an idiot. You know? Not to allow fame to go to your head. Not to want to live segregated from society. And some celebrities have successfully done that. They've kept themselves out of the newspapers and they just like live a very normal life. And it's wonderful. But you have to ask the question, how easy is it to do that? Because these days, the media industry, if you're an actor, a performer, they actually want you to do all of the publicity stuff and to be on Instagram and to kind of have this very personal but public life because it's added value for them. I was thinking about Scarlett Johansson yesterday because she's a bit like this. You wouldn't really know much about her. I don't know who she's married to or whether she has children or anything. I know she does good movies. I like her. I think she's gorgeous, all these things. But she hasn't really lived a kind of public life, has she? She's like a big movie star. Commands huge fees. You heard about what happened with this Black Widow movie that came out during the pandemic and went straight to TV. And she said, "You've got to compensate me. You know, I would have earned more money if it had been in the cinema." And they ended up paying her something like $140 million as an apology, as an out-of-court settlement. Marvel. And then they're like, I think it was Disney who owned Marvel. And then they're like, you know something? We're also going to work with you for another 10 years. How much money does one person need? It's amazing, isn't it? It's like a whole other level. If you want to join in, then you can talk. Stacey's been sending messages. Thank you, Stacey. I appreciate all of those. It's 9:39 here on the West Coast. It's 12:39 Eastern. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. We're looking at the morning papers. We've also digressed to your favorite car, to celebrities not living in the limelight, to the Two Ronnies. I mean, this has been an eclectic and enjoyable 40 minutes so far. I also like the fact, I don't know if you do this, but like I can pull stuff out the back of my brain that I have not thought about for years. I mean, all this stuff about Ronnie Barker retiring and working in the Cotswolds. I mean, the fact that that stuff is even in my head, I just think to myself, do you ever do that, Carla? Do you think, like, how do I know this? How do I even know this? And I do worry that, you know, there are probably a whole generation of people now who live in such a transient way. And I was looking at this on the aeroplane last night when I was getting off the plane, and we were sitting on the plane for a bit, so everybody had their phones out because they had signal, and everyone's just mindlessly scrolling Instagram. And I was looking at these people like with this repetitive strain injury, and I was thinking, none of this is going into your head. This is basically an eye. It's just an eye thing. Because when you read like a book, you read the words, you then have to put them into the brain because you then have to translate that and paint pictures to fit the story. And then you also have to analyze the story to make it, digestible. And then you have to remember it, because if you're reading through a book that's, say, 500 pages, you don't want to get to page 300 and completely forget what's happened on page 100. So you need to log it. It needs to stay in your mind. But my worry with Instagram and this scroll of just visuals, all these people on the aeroplane were just scrolling mindlessly. And I was thinking to myself, this is amazing. What they're all doing serves zero purpose. They're just passing time. Just passing time. Because they weren't lingering on a photograph or reading the caption. There was no engagement. It was just scroll, scroll, scroll. I was watching like half a dozen people sitting there because I was standing and there was 3 people on each side. And I'm watching. I'm like, wow. Instagram has really sucked the life out of society, hasn't it? Sucked the life out of society. It's turned us into transients. I mean, maybe you've given up. I mean, what I've done on Instagram, and this is a little tip for you if you're somebody who's like struggling with it. I have muted everybody I follow. So I'm still following them. They don't think I've unfollowed them, but I can't see their feed. I can't see their feed. I can't see their Insta stories. I can't see anything. My feed is empty. So the only thing I use Instagram for is posting my own stuff. But I cannot see anybody else's stuff. And it's very healthy. So maybe you've done the same. Maybe you feel like your life has been too distracted by social media and it's just time to give it a rest. Some people give it up, don't they? They go, okay, for 3 months I'm going to do no social media, like giving up cigarettes or giving up drinking in January. But I really feel like we shouldn't have to think of these types of things as like addictions. We should be able to manage those types of addictions because, are they as bad as drug addictions or alcohol addictions? Are we as addicted to scrolling and liking and social mediaing as we might be with toxic substances? I wonder if it has the same effect on the brain and the body. The brain, certainly. I don't know about the body. But the body would be affected with Instagram if you just sat on the sofa and you just scrolled endlessly and you never got up or exercised and you just ate Doritos. It's 9:44 or 12:44 Eastern. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. Stacey's with us. She said, I can't do Instagram because I can't see very well. Well, you see, that's a good reason not to do Instagram. Without my glasses, I can't see anything at all. Maybe I should wear my glasses less, and then I wouldn't feel obliged. Or I get to go and pick up my new spectacles today, Stacey. My white clear ones that got re-lensed, they're ready. So I'm going to go collect them. So tomorrow I'll be back in the clear specs, which is good because these black ones, I feel they're very heavy. And I'm excited to have a new lens, Did I mention on this show that I had the option of paying $140 for lenses and I ended up paying a bit more? Because I was like, you really have to invest in your eyesight. If you're lucky enough to have a working eyesight, and Stacey will know what I mean. It's like if your eyesight is compromised, then you have to calibrate your entire existence and your expectations on what is and isn't possible. And I'm discovering this more now as my short-sightedness gets worse. So I'm doing this all the time now, to read stuff close up. And I'm like, when did I get older? Like, when did that happen? 9:45 now. See how time just moves on when you're having fun? Let's go back to the morning papers because we're looking at the Wall Street Journal. Omicron in San Francisco, bicycle makers offering clues on the persistence of inflation, even though Republican lawmakers would have you think that it's Joe Biden's fault. Like it wouldn't have happened if Trump wasn't still the president. It's happened in every country of the world. Inflation is through the roof in every country of the world because of the pandemic. And then, of course, this story about justices questioning abortion rights. And we're going to discuss that a little bit later on in more detail. Okay, let's go to the Los Angeles Times now. And see what the LA Times has to say on this Thursday morning. Justices appear ready to restrict abortion rights. Yeah. I mean, look, the whole point of packing the court with conservatives was for the abortion issue. You know, they weren't going to ban homosexuality or some of the stuff they would like to do. They were just going to go for abortion. That was what they wanted to go for. And that was the reason they put Amy Coney Barrett in there alongside Brett Kavanaugh and Neil. This is the reason. It says the Supreme Court's conservatives sounded ready on Wednesday to severely restrict a woman's right to choose abortion and possibly overturn Roe versus Wade entirely. The court now has 6 justices who are deeply skeptical of abortion rights. And during arguments about a Mississippi law banning abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, only Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. seemed interested in finding a narrow ruling. The others, including Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, Trump appointees, some legal experts thought might join Roberts, they sounded prepared to overturn the landmark ruling. Sean, hello, from California. Hi, Sean. Thank you for joining us. San Francisco case of Omicron variant is first confirmed in the US. Person who returned from South Africa last week fell ill, has tested positive. Philanthropist slain in Beverly Hills. Jacqueline Avant, friend to presidents and celebrities, is shot dead in her home. Wow, didn't know about that. The quiet philanthropist, an elegant behind-the-scenes force. He is a music industry legend, the Black Godfather with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And early Wednesday morning, at least one suspect with a gun entered the Beverly Hills home of Jacqueline and Clarence Avant. Moments later, Jacqueline lay fatally wounded by a gunshot, and Clarence was bereft. That's the second time we've mentioned the name Clarence this morning. I'm a witch. And if we're talking about, legal standing, we could talk about the great Clarence Darrow, of course, who was that kind of, historic American lawyer. That was, there's a whole books and plays written about Clarence Darrow. In fact, here we go. I went to see Clarence Darrow performed in London. It was at the Richmond Theatre. And guess who was playing him? Leslie Nielsen. I sat and watched Leslie Nielsen do 3 hours of Clarence Darrow at the Richmond Theatre. There's not a single joke in it. One of the funniest men in cinema doing a play that was deadly serious. And I watched him in awe. It's kind of amazing, isn't it? It's amazing. That must have been 20 years ago that I saw that. Leslie Nielsen doing Clarence Darrow. And all you really wanted him to say was nice beaver. In the middle of this play, that's all you wanted him to say. And it was a one-man show. There was nobody else in the show. It was a monologue. It was a 3-hour monologue. You should look it up, Carla. See if it says Clarence Darrow, Leslie Nielsen, Richmond Theatre, and tell me what year it was. I'm guessing it was around 2003 or 2004. I'm guessing. Angelenos favor single-family zoning changes. On the front of the LA Times, a majority of Los Angeles County voters back 2 new state laws designed to spur housing construction, including one that significantly changes traditional single-family zoning, a new poll finds. The poll by the LA Business Council Institute, done in cooperation with the LA Times, provides one of the first tests of public reaction to new laws which could bring about dramatic change to California's development landscape. Did you find it, Carla? Oh, he was an amazing person. He reminded me a little bit of like Capote. What was Capote's first name? Capote. What was his first name? Truman, yeah. Truman Capote and Clarence Darrow, for me, I don't know why, but in my mind, they were like similar geniuses. Different genres, but similar geniuses. But, yeah. It was the year 2000. It was 21 years ago, nearly 22 years ago I went to see him do that. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, Clarence Darrow, he basically was amazing in court. That was his thing. He was amazing in court. And I think he was across some landmark cases. That's right. He was a death penalty defendant, and he defended death row cases, over 100 of them, and he always won. Yeah. And who'd have thought that Leslie Nielsen would be cast in this role? It's amazing, isn't it? Best actors are comedic actors, it's true. And I have a theory behind this. I've said it before, but I'll happily say it again. You know, comedy is much harder than serious acting. If you think about it, it's obvious, right? Because to make somebody have any emotions, whether it be sadness or to smile, it's like this. But to really make someone laugh, you're trying to get a kind of emotional. You're really like asking a lot of somebody's emotions. So the skill involved in making somebody laugh requires a vast skill set. And this is why stand-up comedians, I think, make very good actors, straight actors, because when you're a stand-up, you have to pretend to be saying all of this stuff like it's off the cuff, like it's fresh. And that's why it's funny. So you have to learn to talk in a way that is completely natural. And actors who are trained, they can't speak naturally. And that's why Robin Williams, went from being one of the greatest stand-ups in history to being one of the best actors in history. His Dead Poets Society or any of these kind of serious roles that he took on. They were so moving. They were so poignant. They were so real. You didn't for a second think he was acting. Oh, The Fisher King. What a wonderful movie that was. Deborah is in the house. Hi, Deborah. She said, it's hard to live in a fishbowl. You helped me a lot this morning. Good stuff. What did I help you with? Were you defended by Clarence Darrow? I would love to know, Deborah. I'm thrilled that I've helped you. But Clarence Darrow was around, I think he was around in the 60s, late 50s and 60s. I think that was his period. You have to look it up, but I think that was his period. But my point is that even then, there were progressive lawyers helping people who were on death row unnecessarily because they had been convicted of a crime they did not do. And only last week, there was 3 or 4 convictions overturned, life imprisonment and death row convictions overturned. And the fact that, we are able to do this, to me, is in the same camp as not banning abortion. It's in the same camp as Delta advertising 2 men having a cuddle together in premium economy. This is all in the same sphere. It's about basically breaking down all barriers and saying that just because these people are on death row didn't mean they did it, because in many cases they had an unfair trial. And I was reading about one of these cases, I think we talked about it yesterday on the show, where the evidence that was used to convict this guy by modern standards was just garbage evidence. Because, modern forensics are so advanced. So where are we at now in this world where everything is moving forward? Cars can drive themselves. We don't need to drive a manual vehicle anymore. We have lawyers who can go to great levels of detail with evidence. We can put people, using CCTV, like with Carl Rittenhouse. You could see he didn't deny executing 2 people. He did it. There's video of it. But he got off because they added a new law that said that a semi-automatic weapon was acceptable in self-defense. I mean, the world is always turning, but I always thought in my mind that it was turning in a forward trajectory, like was forever going forward. So, equal rights and equal pay and gender equality and all of these things that we associate with the modern world, I just assumed would just keep going in that direction, that we would have this upward trajectory of progress. And yet, a small percentage of people in every country have these ideals of living in the Old Testament, living in a time where, because you see, the thing is, in order to want to make abortion illegal, you have to be somebody who doesn't believe that rape is a thing or sexual assault is a thing. You're not acknowledging these things, which is how it used to be 50, 60 years ago. And all of this is connected. Spencer Tracy played Clarence Darrow years ago, famously. Was that in a movie? I presume it was in a film. Yeah. Oh, Inherit the Wind. That's right, yeah. And Clarence Darrow defended a case that hinged on a teacher and the teachings of evolution. And so that's what all of this is about, isn't it? Unbeknownst to us, this whole conversation is backed up with history. Because Clarence Darrow in the 1960s or 1960 was doing exactly what we're discussing now, talking about the relevance of evolution and how we as a society have to evolve. And my fear is that these types of conversations about evolving, it's a bit like how patriotism on the right in America has become nationalism. which has given way to Nazism. Do you see what I mean? That evolution. My fear is that on the left, where obviously equal rights, abortion rights, voting rights, all of the things on the left, which are also evolutionary, are positioned by the right as being radical, progressive, radical. And it's not. It's evolutionary. It's not revolutionary. It's evolutionary. It is the natural cycle of the planet turning, of the world just becoming a better place to live. Because Clarence Darrow was a corporate lawyer, and he gave it up because he couldn't live with the stress of working for the corporate entities, the big firm, the railway networks, and the big firms. So he ended up going to help the small man, the individual on death row who couldn't afford a good lawyer. And I seem to remember from memory, and Carla, maybe you can check, but I don't think Clarence Darrow charged many of his clients any money. I think he worked for free. I think he had money because he'd worked for the corporate, as a corporate lawyer. And then I think he basically worked for free for a lot of these cases, or as little as they could afford. So, this is, once people work out that it's actually better to be, it's a bit like all the most important jobs in the world are the worst paid, like nursing, right? Nursing is probably the most important job in the world. Looking after people when they're sick. And in England, anyway, nursing is not well paid. In America, it's a bit better paid. But nursing goes back to kind of being you call traditionally in a hospital, you call the nurse sister, right? Well, the word sister comes from the church, because of course the very earliest hospitals were organized by the church. They were sisters in the church. They were nuns, and nuns call each other sister, and that's why in early hospitals the nurses would dress like nuns. The headdress of a nurse is the same as a nun's headdress. If you go back to the 1920s and 30s and 40s and 50s, it was only in the 60s, well, actually probably later, probably only in the 70s, that nurses stopped dressing like nuns. I only just thought of this, by the way. I've never had this conversation with myself before, but it's all as we discuss Clarence Darrow and evolution and progress, and even dressing like a nun as a sister on a ward, and then dressing in the 1960s and 70s when there was that sexual revolution and gender revolution, and women got the vote, and women got, were given a little bit, not total, but a little more equality. I guess, could nurses stop dressing like nuns and start showing their hair? And only the matron dressed like a nun. And then eventually the matron was given that role was merged with the rest of the nurses. And then you move on to the 1970s, and then nurses became male nurses because they were exclusively female. And doctors were male, and that's why there weren't any male nurses, because the men were the doctors. And then, of course, in the 60s and the 70s, more women were getting an education, and more women were becoming doctors, and men were becoming nurses. And even today, in 2021, it's still hard to calibrate your brain when you meet a guy and you're like, what do you do for a living? He's like, I'm a nurse. You're like, oh, great. But there's still a moment where you connect nursing with a female role, and then with the nunnery, going back to the days of Sister, yes, Sister. Sister Mary, looking after a patient. I find the difference between a natural societal evolution and political progression to be two different things in the modern media. That's how they would have you think. And that's why I cannot accept that politically banning abortion in America in 2021, it's not evolutionary. It's purely political. It's not even faith-based. It's not even because it's God's wish. It's none of those things. It's just politics. And unfortunately, the evangelical right will say that it's God's wish. They will say that. But that's God's wish is for, if you believe in a higher entity, God's wish is for us to all live in harmony. And harmony is not banning abortion in a natural evolutionary world. Deborah says, you help me by being so cheerful. Well, thank you, Deborah. I mean, I like the fact that you can identify that there is cheer when we're talking about these, death row, abortion. It is possible, I guess. Because my outlook is very positive. I actually believe that the cream always rises to the top. I'm not a negative person. But I do feel sadness when I read about injustice or this decision by the far right to claim ownership of abortion, rebrand it as pro-life, and try and sell it to the rest of the country as being something they're doing for the good of the unborn babies. It just blows my mind. They're like, who is representing the unborn baby? I'm like, what about the mother? What about the father? What about all the people this affects who've already been born and currently living on this planet? And that's why when the Conservatives celebrated Carl Rittenhouse getting off on a charge of murder, I couldn't understand the contradiction that they would be pro-life when it came to unborn babies, but against life when it came to a conservative executing people and getting away with it. They're very happy for those two Black Lives Matter protesters to die in cold blood, but they want to preserve and protect the rights of an unborn baby. You can't have both. Pick one. So that's just my view. Maybe you have a different view, of course. All views are welcome. It's kind of how it works in this free society. Deborah says it's your positive attitude that I like. Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate it. Okay, where are we? The LA Times. Let's move on now to the New York Times. We're going coast to coast with our newspaper reviews here. Justices indicate they will uphold curb on abortion. Mississippi's ban after 15 weeks poses a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade. I don't know. It's to do with representation, isn't it? Because, if any of the polls of people across the nation suggests that actually, Ruler, hello for joining us. Hello. Appreciate you joining us. Doesn't say where you're from, but I'm pleased that you're here. What was that example I was about to give? I had a really good example just then, and it disappeared from my mind. It'll come back to me. Oh yeah, representation. I knew it would come back. So all the polls that have been done across the US of all adults in the US, there is an overwhelming majority who believe in a woman's right to choose. Because America is actually quite a progressive society. I'm talking about the people, not the politics. And yet, the people that represent the people, the lawmakers, the judges, in this case on the Supreme Court, the balance of the opinions on the Supreme Court does not reflect the balance in society. So we are unrepresented. Because if the majority view across the country is that a woman should have a right to choose whether she keeps or terminates a pregnancy, and yet the Supreme Court is stacked to the right, or not even stacked to the right, stacked with the opinion that that should not be the case, then we are unrepresented. And it's the same even in Congress. The views of the people across the nation, when surveyed nationally, non-politically, on major issues, are not represented in Congress. So, we can have a view, but it would be nice if our representatives represented that percentage share of the view in lawmaking, in the Supreme Court. And it's just not happening. And that's why there will be uproar if this curb on abortion is upheld by the Supreme Court. There will be protests and rioting like you would not believe across the country. Because it is not that decision is not representative of the country as a whole. And I'm not talking about Democrats and Republicans. I'm talking about people of all political persuasions were surveyed time and time again in America. And overwhelmingly, I think it was around 69%, said a woman should have a right to choose. We are not represented as a society. And that is fascism. That is why we are living in a fascist society. Because we are not represented. It is where the lawmakers' views overwhelm and outweigh the views of the people they were elected to represent. And the Supreme Court is not elected by the people. Because they have this weird way of thinking, oh, well, the president selects the Supreme Court and the people vote for the president. Well, the president that got in, who selected these three people on the Supreme Court who have these anti-abortion views, was selected with the help of the Russians and the Chinese. And it was like, and then of course the biggest story, which I have a lot of views on, and that is the Hillary Clinton email scandal that James Comey dropped a week before the election and regretted, where he thought he was being transparent by saying, yes, there is an issue with the email server, but we're looking at it. But instead of holding his tongue till they looked at it and found that there was nothing there, he said it out loud. And therefore, Trump jumped on that. And he was like, why would you vote for her? She's corrupt. And yet, Trump's from like the country's biggest crime family. So, we are living in this dystopia that is this misrepresentation where the people that are ruling are not representative of the people who vote. And that's why boundary lines, gerrymandering, all of these things, the Voting Rights Act, closing polling stations so that black people don't get to vote when they're free to because they're working the rest of the time. Only having the polling place open for like a tiny period of the day, not allowing early voting or drop boxes or mail voting, like all of these normal things for doing normal democratic voting. They've all been shut down by the political right, who are not representative of their constituents. And yet, people's views, are they just give way to that, put up with that. They're like, well, that's just the way it is. Well, it doesn't have to be. This country doesn't have to be so divided, so divisive. This is Backchannel. It's 10:15. I'm Anthony Davis. Omicron erases experts' doubts on third shot. It says as recently as last week, many public health experts were fiercely opposed to the Biden administration's campaign to roll out booster shots on the coronavirus vaccines to all American adults. There was little scientific evidence to support extra doses for most people. The Omicron variant has changed all that, according to the front page of the New York Times this morning. It says scientists do not yet know with any certainty whether the virus is easier to spread or less vulnerable to the body's immune system or immune response. But with dozens of new mutations, the variant seems likely to evade protection from vaccines to some significant degree. I mean, this is what we're waiting for, right? It's going to take another week or so to find out whether or not the vaccines, especially booster shots, are helpful against Omicron. I'm going to take a punt and say that they'll be like, yeah, they pretty much are. But it's like, instead of it being 95% efficacy in the case of Moderna on Delta, they'll be like, it's 79% efficacy on Omicron. And that'll be enough wiggle room for the pharmaceutical companies to say, we're going to make a fresh one. Give you a fresh injection. I don't mind, I'll take them all. I'm very open to it. Give me all of them. Some people have it in their head that being immunized is like a huge thing. And in my mind, it's like that much liquid in my body that is 95% water. Like, it's just being diluted in there. It really is not a problem. It's like adding cordial to lemonade. First US case of the variant is in California, also on the front of the New York Times. How Biden bill extends reach of health care. It says, of all the bitter disappointments he had as president, Harry S. Truman once wrote, the one that has troubled me the most, in a personal way, was the failure to enact a national program that would assure all Americans a full measure of opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. Well, more than 75 years after Truman first proposed universal coverage, Democrats are still chasing his dream. If Biden's social policy bill becomes law, they will make major strides towards fulfilling it. An estimated 3.4 million Americans will gain health insurance as a result of the legislation, which passed the House last month but faces a tough road in the 50-50 Senate. Yeah, I don't know how they're going to get that through. I genuinely don't. It's very worrying to me. I just feel like it's going to be... I think Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, I think these people fundamentally in their heart of hearts, they work for the other side. They're not Democrats. They are prepared to derail an entire social movement. They want to be those people. And yet Manchin, who represents West Virginia, it's the second poorest state in America. And yet a social and climate bill he is going to vote against. And he voted against the infrastructure bill. He finally came around. I don't know. I just feel like he is one of these people who is just fundamentally works for the other team. He's also quite thick, like he doesn't have much of an intellect. And we just assume that lawmakers are intelligent and making informed decisions. And trust me, have you ever heard Joe Manchin speak? talks like a baby. He goes, I don't get it. I just don't get it. Because he's an idiot. And Christian cinema has been completely corrupted by big business. And in fact, there was a very good article the other week about how much money Manchin and cinema have made as a result of donations they have received from right-wing movements and corporate groups for holding out and not agreeing to these policies. They've been paid millions in donations so that they can be a stick in the mud. So every time you see an interview with Joe Manchin, he's like, nope, I'm not voting for it. I don't get it, because he's an idiot. He's making money. It's very lucrative to stand up against the progressive movement. Very lucrative for people who are mentally corrupted, compromised. He's compromised. You don't have to be an intellectual to do anything. You know, I think people give people too much credit. Like, to be a human, you don't have to be smart. We can feel love. We can be romantic. We can procreate. We can bring up a family. We can read books. We can interact. We can cook and drink and work and find a job and do all of the normal things in society, even be a representative, a lawmaker. And yet, we don't have to be intelligent. You don't require intelligence for any of that stuff. To be a mother is instinct, maternal instinct. I mean, look at the animal kingdom. Look at the way I was watching something give birth the other day. Oh, a bear on a Nat Geo show. A bear gave birth, and you know the bear only gestates the baby bear for 2 months. It only takes 2 months for the bear to grow inside the bear. 2 months. And it all happens while the bear is hibernating. So the mother bear doesn't even, I mean, she obviously knows she's pregnant because she's irritable. But she doesn't know that she's got 2 little bears growing inside her who are going to grow to full term. Then they are born while she's hibernating. Then they suckle and they grow stronger and bigger. And then when mummy wakes up after 4 or 5 months of hibernation, she's got these kids. It's all instinct. This is evolution. So much of it is instinctive. And, that's for me why banning abortion is not evolutionary. It's detrimental to our natural evolution. Stacey says my lunch hour is up. Have a very nice rest of the day, Stacey. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. Go have a bath. Have a really nice hot bubble bath, maybe with a bath bomb. I love a bath bomb, don't you? Actually, I really don't like a bath bomb, but my children do. Hi, Jessica. Thank you for joining us. It's 10:24 here on the West Coast. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. It's the Anthony Davis Show. We've been talking about the women's right to choose and Brett Kavanaugh's right to tell women that they can't choose. We've also been talking about the evolution of species, or the origin of species and the evolution of society. I don't want to misquote Charles Darwin. I think that would be a very foolish thing to do at this late stage of the conversation, seeing as we went quite deep with evolution today, drawing those comparisons between the great lawyer of Clarence Darrow giving up his corporate life to protect the poor who were on death row, give them a second chance at life, and how receiving payment from the corporate, corporate America is in some way less satisfying than defending people who have nothing for free. We were talking about Ronnie Barker, a British comedian who was hugely successful and wrote most of the sketches in secret and sent them in to the BBC. And they didn't know who was sending these scripts in, and yet they were performing them and they were producing them. And they were paying this guy. They were sending checks to this guy. And it turns out it was him all along. And then he gave it all up and retired before he was too old to retire. He retired in his early 60s and he went and opened an antique shop in the Cotswolds and carried on living like a normal, down-to-earth human. The fact that he was the biggest comedian in Britain didn't mean that he had to live in an ivory tower behind a gated community or have, be segregated from the people. He wanted to run an antique shop for everybody. And that's what he did. So we've been talking about the pros and the cons of living the life that we think we deserve, and how great riches and success are actually kind of hindering to the richness of your humanity and the success, how you measure success. And I've always measured success in terms of how much free time you have and how much love you have for your family, and you're able to be loved and give love back. That is success. And we've been measuring success in the wrong way for so long, thinking that a Porsche or a Rolls Royce is a measure of success, or a big house with a fountain. I mean, actually, I digress, because I do believe that having a central island unit in your kitchen that is plumbed for water and electricity is the true measure of success today. If you can walk all the way around your island unit and be like, this is my kitchen, you've made it. But I suppose you could do that in a small studio apartment, and then you just don't have much room for walking around it, but at least you've got one. So my point is that I feel like all of these things are connected, and they all go back to the discussions in the Supreme Court about a woman's right to choose. And they all go back to this concept of representation, and how I've been saying that we are truly not represented by our lawmakers because the numbers are skewed, because America is actually a very progressive country. And all of this negativity that we see on Fox News, and the fear and the fear-mongering and the anger, and how terrible the world is, and how terrible people are. And it's just not true. People are good. Everyone is born good, fundamentally. But it's the Wild West out here, and people own big, scary guns, and they get themselves into situations. I mean, in England, here's something that's interesting. If you're not happy with your life, if you don't want to live, it's actually quite hard to remove yourself from society, to commit suicide. It's actually very difficult in England because we don't have guns. You can't stab yourself. It's not possible. It's not humanly possible to stab yourself and kill yourself with a knife. In America, the suicide rate is so much higher because you can just go into any shop and buy a gun, and you're just one click away from it being over. And so I do feel like that, in England we talk about going to Veritas. Is it called Veritas? In Switzerland? I think it is. It's a company that does elected suicide. You basically pay them. You know how much I actually looked up on the website how much it costs to do this. What's the phrase they call it? What do they call it? I forget what they call it. Something elected dying. Isn't it something like that? Is it like elected dying? You choose to end your life. And people who have cancer or dementia or things that they don't want to continue living. In the UK, the only way to really end your life, because you can't go into a gun shop and buy a gun, because they don't have gun shops, is to go and pay to go to Switzerland to have your life ended legally, because the law on end of life is different in Switzerland to everywhere else in Europe. Anyway, I went on the Veritas website, this company that does this. They put you inside a capsule. And they give you 2 injections, and then you just fall asleep. That's how it's done. Do you know how much it is? Carl, have you any idea? I'll tell you how much it is. And take a guess. Take a guess. Any guesses on how much you would have to pay this company in Switzerland to end your life in the nicest possible way? Very comfortable. Your family go with you. I think you're allowed 1 person with you. I can't believe I looked it up. It's Carla's guessing. $50,000, so that's around £30,000, you say. Because you got to remember, who can afford to do this? Most people have spent all their money on care. It's around $200,000. It's around $200,000. to do this. It's a very morbid conversation. Deborah guessed 10,000. It's around 200,000 to receive a lethal injection, and to pass away peacefully and quietly. And then they just pop you down the garbage chute. You literally go straight into a dumpster out the back of the building. Is it called assisted dying? I think it's called assisted dying. Yeah, assisted dying. Now, I personally believe that assisted dying should be legal everywhere. I personally believe that. If you have a right to choose about your health, you have a right to choose about the end of your life as well. And I think it would be great because then people could have funerals for themselves before they die. There was an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm in the new series, the new season, where one of Larry's friends throws a funeral for himself because he thinks funerals are so nice that everyone says such nice things about them that he's sitting upstairs, it's being live streamed, and he's sitting upstairs with his wife watching all his friends at his funeral. He's not even ill, but this is his wish, and so they all have to go to his funeral. And it's very, very funny because in the end, they open a cupboard and they discover that he'd been stockpiling PPE. And they're so furious with him for stockpiling PPE that they just all walk out of the funeral, and he's upstairs, he's furious. He comes out on the landing of his bedroom because it's in his house, and he's like, "Where are you all going?" And they're all like, "You stole all the toilet paper." But just think, if assisted dying was legal everywhere and it was done in this, it's a very humane process the way it's done. You could literally invite people to your execution and it be done in a very celebratory way, where you truly get to say goodbye to somebody and someone isn't taken from you prematurely. This is the weirdest conversation I've ever had. But I'm really enjoying it. Think about it. These modern constructs of the way that we do things. Maybe we're doing them in the wrong order. Maybe it would be better if we were assisted dying was legal and it did not cost $200,000. It was, let's say it was like $2,000, which is about the cost of a funeral, right? So it should be just the cost of a funeral. Actually, the price of a funeral since the pandemic has gone up to $5,000. How do I know that? I must have read it in the last couple of years. It's 10:34. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. I think considering I'm completely jet lagged and haven't slept for 3 days, I'm doing kind of quite well. Maybe I find it easier to kind of have deeper conversations when I'm delirious. Do you ever find that? If you're a bit delirious, you're hanging out with friends and you've had a few drinks and you suddenly go to this new level of depth where you're just how did my brain do that? I'm delirious. Let's go back to this story it's a huge story at the moment. This is a Trump-era policy called Remain in Mexico. Well, that's not its official name. It has a different official name. Remain in Mexico is what it became. So there's been a big problem at the southern border. You may have seen this. When Trump left and Biden got in, people realized that Biden was not going to be so extreme with his views, and he would actually uphold asylum. Trump didn't even uphold asylum. Asylum is something that is like built into a modern democracy. If you seek asylum because the country you've come from is in a political state of unrest, and you feel unsafe there, you feel like your life is in danger, you can seek political asylum in a safe country. That is international law. Trump did away with that. He didn't even know what asylum was. He thought it was like a place he might end up one day. Fingers crossed. Anyway, Biden, because of this rush on the southern border, is going to have to reawaken this policy and relaunch it. Remain in Mexico on Monday due to a court order, meaning the US will again send migrants back to Mexico to await their immigration court hearings. And restarting the program is pending final approval from Mexico, which is expected soon after the formal US announcement. The program, which forces non-Mexican migrants to remain in Mexico until their immigration court dates in the US, was suspended at the beginning of President Joe Biden's term and then formally terminated months later. But in August, a federal judge in Texas said the Biden administration had violated federal law in how it had gone about unwinding the program and required that it be restarted. Administration officials on Thursday stressed they were only re-implementing the program called the Migrant Protection Protocols. There you go, that's its full name. Migrant Protection Protocols, which is, of course, a propaganda name, isn't it? Think about it. Someone who's seeking asylum, they're not even from Mexico. They could be from, South America, and they're moving up through Mexico to get to the safe hold of America. And they're being forced to remain in Mexico. And it's called Migrant Protection Protocols. But what it actually should be called is American Xenophobia Protocols. There's a lot of room in America for people. It has more landmass than any country of the world. So anyway, it sounds to me like Biden has not restarted this. It sounds to me like this is not Joe Biden saying, let's remain in Mexico again, the migrant protection protocols. This to me sounds like a conservative judge in Texas is forcing the Biden administration to restart it because he's saying that the way that Biden undid it was a violation of federal law that Trump had imposed. Now, as it happens, it's convenient because there are too many people waiting at the southern border and they can't process people fast enough. And it is becoming a big problem, and no one's denying that. Just adjusting my earpiece because it's giving me a little bit of jib here. There we go. Put it back in. I have a little earpiece inside my headphones. It just enables me to hear Carla. I'm giving away all the trade secrets now. So the program will potentially open to all nationalities from the Western Hemisphere. With the relaunch of Remain in Mexico, 2 controversial Trump-era border policies will be in place under Biden. The public health order, known as Title 42, that allows for the swift expulsion of migrants encountered at the U.S.-Mexico border. That remains in effect. The health order will take precedence over the migrant protection protocols, meaning that the U.S. will continue to expel eligible individuals under the health order. Those who are not expelled under the health order will be considered on a case-by-case basis to wait in Mexico for their court hearings. I mean, the other thing I read the other day that Biden's going to do is he's going to make sure that everybody is vaccinated. So if you come to the southern border and you're claiming asylum, you're seeking to enter America, and you get turned back to remain in Mexico, you'll be inoculated. On the understanding that you'll be able to put your case, if you want to have your case heard, then that's fine. But you've got to be inoculated against coronavirus. Officials said the Biden administration has made several changes to the program, such as asking all potential enrollees whether they have a fear of returning to Mexico. Oh, that's interesting. So maybe what Biden is doing, and again, this has not really been widely reported, is that Biden is being forced to restart this program because the judge in Texas is saying you undid this policy illegally, because it's a political conservative right-wing judge who is trying to maintain Trump-era policies. Biden is forced to do it, but adds two caveats. One, we're going to inoculate you. And two, we're going to say, are you scared of Mexico as well? Because, of course, there's drug lords. And as Trump said, all Mexicans are rapists, according to Trump. So if you want to be raped, then remain in Mexico. But otherwise, come on into the United States. But, the media loves to present this as Biden is actually as bad as Trump. And it's not the case. It really is quite wrong. I mean, Biden was a public defender. That's what he did for a living, He was a public defender. He's not a fascist businessman. Two very different types of people. But unfortunately, he still is at the mercy of US federal law. And if the law says that he redacted the Remain in Mexico policy too quickly, then he has to respond to that. The categories of vulnerable individuals can be exempted from enrollment in the program or be expanded to include those with physical and mental health challenges, the elderly and those at risk of discrimination, particularly because of their gender orientation or sexual identity. The US also agreed to complete court hearings within 180 days. Well, that's okay, so you only have to remain in Mexico for 3 months. No, not 3 months. 6 months. 6 months. 180 days is 6 months. Sorry, I'm delirious. It's 10:42. This is Backchannel. I'm Anthony. Thank you for your messages. Thank you for joining in. So many people joining us right now. Thank you. We are inundated with your messages, and if only I had time to read them all out. But thank you. Deborah's with us. Jessica's with us. Hello to everybody. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can stream there, and you can comment there. You can go to backchannel.tv, which is, of course, the web chat, and you can type your messages there. So many ways to be in touch with this show. It's 10:43. And a reminder that Volley has a growing list of shows, including Haley and Allison Live, waking you up in the morning, with lots of laughs and their one-star cinema review, or Live Every Day with Liv Harrison, live from Texas, celebrating the little things in life with plenty of coffee. That's Carla's favorite bit. Or what about the charming and funny Hal Rudnick? Shallow Hal, your pal Hal, whose program follows this show at 11 o'clock. Shallow Hal's one of my favorite movies, starring Jack Black and Tony Robbins. I've been reading about Anthony Robbins recently, and I'm not very happy with him, to be honest. He's a bit of an anti-vaxxer. He's telling people to be wary of the vaccine. I don't think he realizes what people will do with that information, and how people will respond to that information. It's almost like the world is okay provided you're in Tony Robbins' world. Live by Tony Robbins' rules and your life could be as great as his. I watched, there's a very good documentary about one of his events. And it follows him around for a couple of months. And you see his home in Florida. Oh my goodness me. He lives in this, it's like a James Bond lair in Florida. It's like a lair with like a mezzanine and a huge spiral staircase. And I mean, he's made a lot of money. And people pay thousands. They pay like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 to go to his seminar. And it's a non-religious thing, but it's like an evangelical experience. It's like he heals people. I used to be quite a fan of Tony Robbins because he has a cameo in the Jack Black movie Shallow Hal. Just in an elevator. Like puts a spell on Hal. Carla doesn't like him at all. Because she's like, he's an ex-car salesman who still behaves like a car salesman. He's basically selling you happiness, selling you success. Some people buy these self-help books. I've never bought a single self-help book because I don't believe that a book is going to help me. I believe the only person that's going to help me is me. And I don't think that Tony Robbins' ethos is going to help me. Now, I have a friend who's called Jack. He buys all of these books. And arguably, he needs the most help. And despite having all of these books, it hasn't really helped him. What's helped him is him. Changing his diet and exercising and just, a renewed perspective. And it's not come from the books. Or the weird tea that he drinks that he thinks is better for his digestive system. There's always a weird tea. I'm going into the recline for the last 10 minutes of this show. I don't know what it is that he's drinking, but it's like, I'm not drinking that stuff. It's the 2nd of December, 2021. I am going to be unwrapping my Christmas tree today, getting it out of the box. Going to allow my children to decorate it tomorrow night. And Christmas will finally be here. My parents are arriving on Saturday from the UK. They've been tested and vaccinated and got all the paperwork done for the airline so that they can come into the country safely, bringing no Omicron with them, but plenty of Sweet and Low. Because that's what mums do. Have you got change for a quarter? No, but I've got Sweet and Low. Whatever's just like rummaging around in their purse, whatever's a little bit of foresting. After this, I think I'm going to go and collect my new spectacles. Oh, they don't open till noon. I might go and see my kids, and I'll take one of them to go collect the new spectacles with me. I don't want to make a spectacle of myself, but there'll be new glasses on my face tomorrow. Can't wait. Need to get them adjusted. That's why you can't send someone to go and collect your glasses for you, because they make a little adjustment. They just make sure that they fit you perfectly. These are the advantages of paying full price for something from a reputable store. It comes with extras. You get a little box, and you get a little chamois leather and various little, trinkets to go with your purchase. A little branded bag. So we've been discussing Remain in Mexico, this Trump-era policy that looks like it's returning under Joe Biden on Monday, but it's not all is what it seems. So if you read in the media that actually, he's restarting a Trump policy, he's not. He's being forced to by a Texas judge who says that undoing it was illegal, and he's doing it with caveats. Inoculation, asking people if they're a little nervous of remaining in Mexico, and if they are, then I presume that they'll be able to come into the US and await their case in the United States. And this is why, I often say nothing is what it seems. If you think that the way something is presented to you is like that's the end of the story, you're mistaken. The story does not end with the story. There's always another story behind the story. Behind the story. And that's what interests me. I really feel like we can learn so much just by doing a little bit of digging. Don't rely on any one entity to tell you what's happening. Oh, we haven't done the news update. Let's do that. Yeah, we've got the US news update. It's our It's our podcast, and here it comes. It's just 2 minutes long. This is what's happening across America.
It's Thursday, December 2. From the Volley Network, this is your daily US news update. I'm Anthony Davis. The United States on Wednesday identified its first known case of Omicron, discovered in a fully vaccinated patient who travelled to South Africa, as scientists continue to study the risks the new COVID variant could pose. Public health officials said the infected person, who had mild symptoms, returned to the United States from South Africa on November 22nd and tested positive 7 days later. That patient was fully vaccinated but did not have a booster shot, according to Dr. Anthony Fauci, the US top infectious disease official who briefed reporters at the White House. The person is in self-quarantine, and all of the patient's close contacts have tested negative so far, he said. Key questions remain about the new variant, which has rattled markets amid signs it may spread quickly and evade some of the defenses provided by vaccines. It has been found in 24 countries, including Spain, Canada, Britain, Austria, and Portugal. Fauci said it could take 2 weeks or more to gain insight into how easily the variant spreads from person to person, how severe is the disease it causes, and whether it can bypass the protections provided by vaccines currently available. Meanwhile, US lawmakers' efforts to keep the US government operating hit a stumbling block on Wednesday as a group of hardline Republicans threatened to try and block any plan that allowed COVID-19 vaccine mandates to proceed. Congress has until midnight on Friday to pass a measure continuing to fund federal government operations or face a partial shutdown during a pandemic. Your daily US news update is part of the Volley Network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo device to open Backchannel.
There it is. That's the US news update. It's a podcast that I do every day that you can subscribe to. It's part of the Volley Network. You just go to wherever you get your podcasts and hit subscribe when you see it. US News Update with Anthony Davis. It's 10:52 on the West Coast here. It's 1:52 Eastern. I'm Anthony Davis. This is Backchannel. Just a couple of minutes more of me, and then your pal Hal will be here, and he'll be talking about everything that he normally talks about and more. Let's just do a little recap on what we've been discussing. We've been talking about we were looking through the morning papers, and we were kind of getting a flavor of what's happening across America today, from the justices questioning abortion rights precedent in the Supreme Court. We've been talking about the first case of Omicron in the US is detected in San Francisco, so it's finally here in California. We were discussing supply chain issues and talking about how bicycles are a really good example of a product that has multiple component parts, and why it's been harder to get a bicycle during this period and this persistent inflation which is happening all around the world. These are some of the subjects we've been talking about. Stacey joined us, Rula, Jessica, Sean. Thank you to anybody and everybody who was literally hanging off my every word and joining in. I really appreciate that. It's very sweet of you. And also to Deborah, who's been watching and listening on YouTube. She's waiting for her son Hal. That's what his show's called to her. It's called My Son Hal. So stand by for My Son Hal. That's coming along in about 30 seconds time. Or actually in about 5 minutes. You'll get a kind of temporary "we'll be back soon" screen just for a few minutes. Give you time to freshen up. Give you time to freshen up before the next feature here on Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. Thank you for joining me. I'll come back tomorrow morning. We'll do the last one of the week. Tomorrow is Friday, of course. I'll be back and we'll sit and we'll chat together in this very mutually respectful and non-political way. This kind of equal rights, equal views, all views are welcome. So join me tomorrow from 9 a.m. Pacific, and have a great day. And stick around for your pal Hal. He's next on Backchannel.